If you grew up around combat sports like we did, you were probably told that the baddest man on the planet was always considered to be the boxing heavyweight champion. Little did you know that the baddest man on the planet didn't wear 10-ounce gloves, and he didn't fight for the UFC. The baddest man on the planet didn't even wear all black. He actually wore a striped sweatshirt that you'd expect your grandfather to wear to a bowling league game on Wednesday nights. His name was Fedor Emelianenko, and he would first come on the scene in the year 2000 fighting in the Rings organization. Emelianenko was feared for his devastating knockout power along with his ability to submit you. The early part of his career saw him accumulate wins over future Pride legend Ricardo Arona and former Strikeforce light heavyweight champion Renato Babalu Sobral. It was during this time that he would also suffer his first career defeat at the hands of Tsuyoshi Kosaka, or TK as most people called him. The loss was controversial in nature as TK threw a punch that missed, but as the punch flew past Fedor's head, TK's elbow grazed Fedor's eye and opened up a bad cut. Elbows were illegal under this rule set, but the referee did not see that it was the elbow in fact that opened the cut, and thus ruled the fight a TKO victory for Kosaka. The loss did little to diminish Fedor's reputation. In fact, it was treated the same way people today treat John Jones's loss to Matt Hamill.
With a professional record of 10 wins and 1 loss, Fedor would then make his debut in Pride Fighting Championships. There he would face a Dutch fighter by the name of Semi Schilt. Schilt was a veteran of Pancrase and the UFC, and at 6'11", he towered over Fedor. Fedor would claim the win by decision, a first of many under the Pride banner. Fedor would next take out MMA veteran Keith Haring via doctor stoppage. This win would set up what was Fedor's biggest challenge to date, a fight versus Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira for the Pride heavyweight belt. The stage was set for Sambo versus Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Both fighters had their moments in the fight, but in the end, Fedor would win the belt by unanimous decision. It would not be the last time he came across Minotauro in his career. Fedor's next fight in Pride was against Japanese star Kazuyuki Fujita. This would be the first time we saw Fedor in any sort of trouble. Emelianenko would take the upper hand early, but the Japanese fighter came roaring back, landing a big right hand that left Fedor on wobbly legs. Fedor would recover and eventually land a kick to the body, as well as a left hand to the iron head skull of Fujita. It sent him crashing to the canvas. Emelianenko would then slap on the rear naked choke for the finish. After besting Fujita, Fedor had 11 more wins under the Pride FC banner, including multiple title defenses. Some of the most notable wins were Mark Coleman in the opening round of the Pride Heavyweight Grand Prix, where he submitted the former UFC champion in the first round. This notable win for the Pride veteran stood out because he had triumphed over one of Pride's rival promotion's former champions. Including Coleman and the aforementioned Nogueira, Fedor defeated 6 former UFC heavyweight champions. Next up for Fedor was another former UFC heavyweight champion, Kevin Randleman. And this fight was definitely one of Fedor's closest calls in his first 33 fights. Who could ever forget the monster viciously slamming the last Emperor? Those that witnessed the fight live thought that not only was the fight over, but that Fedor's career might be over. Fedor survived the slam, and soon after he submitted the future UFC Hall of Famer.
Fedor's dominance continued in Pride. He would end 2004 by rematching against Minotauro at Pride Final Conflict, where an accidental cut led to a no contest. The fight would be rebooked soon at Pride Shockwave, where he would pick up another decision win over Nogueira. Next up was a rematch against the only man to ever give Emelianenko a loss, Tsuyoshi Kosaka. The doctor would again stop this fight, but this time it was due to the punishment Fedor had served up, avenging the only loss of his career. Pride Final Conflict was the stage for one of Fedor Emelianenko's biggest fights in Pride. On the other side of him, a heavyweight with one-shot knockout power, the Croatian sensation Mirko Cro Cop. This was one of the biggest fights of Fedor's career for 2 reasons. First, the threat that Mirko presented on the feet. And second, it would give him an opportunity to avenge a loss his brother Alexander Emelianenko suffered at the hands of Cro Cop just 1 year earlier. Fedor took Crow Cup's best shots, and in the end, it was Emelianenko's pressure and ground and pound that secured the victory for the Russian. Emelianenko would finish out his Pride career with 3 final fights, defeating Zuluzinho by stoppage, Mark Coleman by submission in a rematch that took place in Las Vegas, Nevada, and Mark Hunt in the Saitama Super Arena in Tokyo, Japan.
After the Pride era, Fedor took his talent stateside for 2 Affliction shows, where he would face 2 more former UFC heavyweight champions, Tim Sylvia and Andrei Arlovski. While most of the Pride FC roster was now competing in the UFC, Fedor was not. Instead, the popular apparel company made a splash in the MMA with 2 successful shows, and Fedor was their big star. At Affliction Band, Fedor stopped Sylvia in 36 seconds. In the process, he won the WAMA heavyweight title, adding even more silverware to his cabinet. 6 months later, at Affliction Day of Reckoning, Fedor had a more difficult time, as Arlovski had some early success against the Russian and even went for a finish against a hurt Fedor. And then boom, Fedor lands a vicious punch on an oncoming Arlovski, which left the arena crowd speechless. Though the Affliction era only lasted 2 shows, his wins there solidified his status as the #1 fighter in the world at any weight class. And next up, Fedor was headed to another promotion, Strikeforce. The winning would continue stateside as Fedor knocked out Brett Rogers in his Strikeforce debut. It didn't matter if he was fighting in Russia, Japan, USA, the winning continued across many of the biggest promotions, that is until June 26, 2010. After 9.5 years, Fedor Emelianenko lost. He would be submitted by future heavyweight champion Fabricio Verdum in the first round of another Fedor barn burner. Losses would follow to Antonio Silva and Dan Henderson, both of them via finish, and many thought at that point that this would be the beginning of the end for Fedor. All the greats had suffered losses in the sport of MMA, but none crushed the hearts of fight fans more than the one suffered by Fedor.
As the greats always do, Fedor found a way to rebuild himself. He came back to pull off 3 straight victories. The last one over Pedro Hizel had rumors going in that it could be his very last one. When it was all said and done, Fedor did in fact announce his retirement. Emelianenko did return to action in 2015 to resume his fighting career. He would pull off 2 more wins, one in Rizin and one at Fight Night Global. It was in 2016 that Fedor would be reunited with his former boss, Scott Coker, who was now running Bellator Fighting Championships. They announced that Fedor would be fighting for Bellator, and first up would be former UFC heavyweight Matt Mitrione. After falling ill the day of the fight, the matchup was postponed to a later date, where Mitrione would eventually win by KO in the first round. Fedor would reappear in 2018 as part of the Bellator Heavyweight Grand Prix. He would defeat Frank Mir, yet another former UFC heavyweight champion, in round 1 of the Grand Prix. In the semifinals, he would face the American gangster Chael Sonnen. Fedor dominated the fight, finishing Sonnen off in round 1, putting him in the finals versus Ryan Bader. All eyes were on the final. The bout only lasted 35 seconds, with Bader knocking Fedor down with a jab and following it up with a devastating right hand, followed by some ground and pound. That loss all but cemented Fedor's fate in the sport of MMA. To the surprise of most, Emelianenko would return to face former UFC and Pride legend Quinton Rampage Jackson. Fedor looked sharp and finished Jackson halfway through the first round. Next up would be a fresh matchup in Timothy Johnson. Johnson had come off a decision loss to Valentin Moldavsky, but had rattled off 3 straight wins before that fight. Emelianenko would show signs of his former self, landing a big hook that sent Johnson crashing to the canvas. So here we are. The People's Forever Heavyweight Champion does battle one last time against Ryan Bader at Bellator 290 at the Kia Forum in Los Angeles, California, a fight that he asked for. Regardless of the outcome, one thing stays the same. Fedor Emelianenko will always be one of the greatest to ever compete in mixed martial arts, and it's been an honor covering him. Once a champ, always a champ. And remember, pride never dies.